Hello and welcome to the Edmonton Scottish Society YouTube channel. Tonight we will be presenting a virtual Robert Burns event. Our programme consists of traditional speeches, toast to the haggis, the Immortal Memory, toast to the lads and lasses, and a special treat tonight, we have Mr. Ian Murray doing some Burns poetry. I'll just run through the programme for you. Mr. Bill Gibson will be doing the address to the haggis. David Meffin will be doing the Immortal Memory. Dr. Terry Carlisle will be doing the toast to the lasses. And Bonnie Mahalshin will be doing the toast to the lads. Pipe music is courtesy of the Clanmacnaughton Pipe Band, and they are the official pipe band of the Edmonton Scottish Society. Highland Dance is performed by the Rebecca McKinnon School of Highland Dance, and we have a special treat with Ian Murray doing some Burns poetry for us. So we hope to see you perhaps in 2022 at a local Burns night near you. But until then, Slange, we'll see you soon. Bye.
Ladies and gentlemen, the haggis, God bless him. Fair fa, your honest sonsy face, great chieftain of the puddin' race, a bin the ma ye take your place, pained stripe per therm. Wheeler ye were there grace, as lang as my arm. The groaning trencher, there ye fell. Your hurdies like a distant hill. Your pain would help to mend a mill in times of need, while through your pores the dews distill. Like amber bead. His knife see rustic labour did, and cut you up with ready slicht, trenching your gushing entrails bricht like ony ditch. Then, what a glorious sight, warm reeking, rich. Then, horn for horn, the streets and strive, deal to the hindmost on they drive, till other wheel-swamped kites be live or bent like drums, and all good man, maist like to rive, be thankit hums. Is there the hour is French ragout, or olio that would staw a sou, or fricassee that would make her spew with perfect scunner? Looks down with sneering, scornful view on sick a dinner. Poor devil see him out his trash, as fakeless as a withered rash, his spinel shank a good whiplash, his knave a nit, through bloody flood or field to dash. Who unfit? But mark the rustic, haggis fed, the trembling earth resounds his tread, clapping his wally knave a blade, he'll make it whistle, and legs, and arms, and heads, he'll sned like taps a thistle. Ye powers who make mankind your care, and dish him out his bill of fare, old Scotland wants nae skinking ware that joups and luggies. But if you'd hear grateful prayer, Gie her a haggis.
In reading Burns's poetry and biographies about him, and reading various Burns supper speeches, we come to know Robbie Burns as a passionate, ribald, and randy character, a real scallywag to say the least. As one observer noted, Burns was a big fan of women, but, however, not such a big fan of responsibility, commitment, or the withdrawal method, and was thought to have fathered somewhere between 12 and 16 children with at least 4 and probably 5 women before he died at the age of 37. His early poetry regarding the lassies often referred to his conquests and showing what a lad was he. 1773, one of his earliest poems regarding the lassies was Handsome Nell, written about aged 14-year-old Nellie Kilpatrick. Burns was 15 at the time when he met Nell, a Mauchline belle, and wrote of one of his earliest songs. Oh, once I'd loved a bonny lass, aye, and I love her still, and whilst that virtue warms my breast, I'll love my handsome Nell. Nell had a big influence on young Burns, as he later wrote. I never had the least thought or inclination of turning poet till I got once heartily in love. 1784, after Burns's father died, Robbie becomes the head of the farm in Mossigel near Mauchline, and it is there he becomes acquainted with the other Mauchline belles, who included, besides Nellie Kilpatrick, his dear Bess Elizabeth Peyton and Jean Armour. As well at this time, Burns was enamored with Elizabeth Peyton, a servant girl in the Burns household. Burns also had met Jean Armour in early 1784 when he was 25 and she was 17. A shapely brunette, and no doubt one of his favorite Mauchline belles. Regarding Elizabeth Peyton, he wrote of her physical presence, describing her from top to bottom in a rather raunchy poem called The Rantin' Dog, and I will read a little bit of the beginning and leave out some of the more explicit parts. My girl, she airy, she's buxom and gay, her breath is as sweet as the blossoms in May. A touch of her lips it ravishes quite. She's always good-natured, good-humored, and free. She dances, she glances, she smiles with a glee. Her eyes are the lightnings of joy and delight, her slender neck, her handsome waist, her hair well buckled, her stays well laced, her tapered white leg, etc., etc. And he ends it by saying, and oh, for the joys of a long winter night. In 1785, Elizabeth Peyton bore Burns his first child, a daughter called Elizabeth Bess Burns. And Elizabeth Peyton eventually ended up marrying another local farmer, but had received a small 20-pound sum from Burns as part of his responsibility. 1786, with the birth of his daughter to Elizabeth occurring, Burns was also at this time embarking on his relationship with Jean Armour. Their mutual attraction led Jean to becoming pregnant with twins in 1786. Burns signed a paper attesting his marriage to Jean, but her father was in greatest distress and fainted away. Armour's daughter Jean was not to wed a worthless rhymer. To avoid disgrace, her parents sent Jean to live with an uncle in Paisley. Although Armour's father initially forbade it, they were married in 1788. And as we come to know, Burns and Armour had 9 children, 3 of whom survived to infancy. During 1786, a complicated sequence of legal issues followed, and Burns became involved with both Mary Campbell and later that year to Agnes MacLeod's in Edinburgh before he finally married Jean. In 1786, Mary Campbell, who worked in Mauchline as a nursemaid for Gavin Hamilton, was a dear friend, a friend of Burns, and later she worked as a dairymaid nearby. She was nearer in age to Burns, being 21 at the time, and was tall and fair-haired with blue eyes. Coming from Dunoon in Argyll, Burns called her his Highland Mary. Burns turned to Mary after he had been deserted by Jean, and in Mary he found a warm-hearted, charming young creature as ever blessed a man could be with generous love. My Highland Lassie O was inspired by Mary Campbell, and it is noted that Burns and Mary Campbell had discussed the idea of marriage, and it was thought that Burns's plan to escape his legal issues by sailing to Jamaica included taking Mary with him. They exchanged Bibles and possibly matrimonial vows, but she died in October 1786 with a fever while attending her brother's typhus illness, thus putting an end to the plan and leaving Burns's heart broken. He continued to write about her 3 years after her death, Mary in Heaven. In 1786, in September that year, Jean Armour had given birth to the twins. These complications were offset by the fact that in July that year, Burns's famous Kilmarnock edition was published for the first time, and his status in the world was beginning to change. In 1786, Burns set out for Edinburgh again in November, and with Mary out of the way, Burns could not, and as distraught as he was about Mary Campbell, Burns could not resist the temptation of impressing Jean with his newfound fame at the close of one of his tours. The inevitable result was that Jean became pregnant again. This time, now that Burns was a man of fame, the attitude of the Armours was different. Possibly they threw Jean at Burns, hopefully assuming she would have the wit to make him marry her before giving her body to him once more. When they found out Jean had failed again, her parents were furious and refused to allow her to remain under their roof. Still in 1787, while in Edinburgh, Burns became head over heels in love with Agnes MacLeod's, a divorced and devout Calvinist who was the subject of I Fond Kiss. Agnes was also referred to as Agnes Craig or Nancy Craig by her very close friends. Well, this was a platonic relationship with the poet Agnes. Platonic because from Agnes's point of view, Burns's advances were, as she put it in a letter, delightful when under the check of reason and religion. Any mention of love brought reproof again from Agnes time and again, and counter-reproof from Burns, who had agreed with her idea of using Arcadian names of Clorinda and Sylvander to write to each other. A series of letters, poems, and songs reflected this deep love that they had together. This is from Sylvander to Clorinda. When dear Clorinda, matchless fair, first struck Sylvander's raptured view, he gazed, he listened to despair, alas, 'twas all he dared to do. Love from Clorinda's heavenly eyes transfixed his bosom through and through, but still in friendship's guarded guise, for more the demon feared to do. And the poem ends with this last stanza. Then take, Clorinda, friendship's hand, friendship at least I may avow, and lay no more your chill command. I'll write whatever I've to do, Sylvander. However, Agnes's resistance to physical intimacy fueled Burns's verbal passion, but with continued denial, the affair declined. His thwarted physical passion, though, found expression with Jenny Clow, Agnes's servant girl. About little is known, beyond the fact that she later bore Burns a son named Robert. In truth, confusion and turmoil reigned. In May of 1787, Burns, while touring the borders, visited the farm of Berryhill, the home of his friends, the Ainsleys. On one particular Sunday, he accompanied them to church, where the minister gave a heavy denunciation of obstinate sinners. Seeing Miss Nancy Ainsley searching for a passage, Burns asked for her Bible and wrote these lines on the inner cover. Fair maid, you need not take the hint, nor idle texts pursue. 'Twas guilty sinners that he meant, not angles such as you. At first smitten by Nancy Ainsley earlier in that year, February 1787, Burns had come into contact with Jean again in Edinburgh. Later that year, he left Nancy's father to tell her that Burns was married to Jean. On the 25th of May, Burns's feeling for Jean Armour had turned full circle. He wrote to a friend, I am so enamored with a certain girl's prolific twin-bearing merit that I've given her a title to the best blood in my body, and so farewell rakery. On the 28th of May, he wrote to another friend, I have been extremely fortunate in all my buyings and bargainings hitherto, Mrs. Burns not excepted, which title I now avow the world. None of these references suggested the enraptured lover some of more Burns's romantic biographers would have us to believe him. More the pragmatist, Burns realizing that she was going to be the mother of his children. 9 children, the last of whom was born on the day of her husband's funeral. Jean seems to have been a generous and compliant woman, willing to put up with his wildest extravagancies, even to the extent of taking his illegitimate daughter by Anna Park in 1791 with the remark, our Robbie should have had 2 wives. In a letter of the 16th of September 1788, Burns wrote that his marriage was not in consequence of the attachment of romance, perhaps, but I had a long and much loved fellow creature's happiness or misery in my determination, and I durst not trifle with so important a deposit, nor have I any cause to repent it. In the poem I Love My Jean, Burns wrote the following, of all the airs the wind can blow, I dearly like the west. For there the bonny lassie lives, the lassie I love best. There's wild wood grow and rivers row, and many a hill between. But day and night my fancy's flight is ever with my Jean. I see her in the dewy flowers, I see her sweet and fair. I hear her in the tuneful birds, I hear her charm in the air. There's not a bonny flower that springs by fountain, wood, or green. There's not a bonny bird that sings, but minds me of my Jean. Burns's life was full of romantic fantasy to the point that he did not speak to some of his lassies. He wrote about their beauty, which filled him with passion. From a Burns poem, Green Grow the Rashes. Old nature swears, the lovely dears, her noblest work she classes o. Her prentice hand she tried on man, and then she made the lasses o. Please, gentlemen, be up on your feet and join me in a toast to the lassies. To the lassies.
When preparing for this toast, I asked some of the other Scottish Society ladies to come up with one or two words to compare to men. Marg, after a great deal of thought, said she would compare them to placemats. They only show up when there's food on the table. And Sandra, the practical-minded member, compared men to bike helmets. Handy in an emergency, but otherwise they just look silly. Leanne, who is an accounting whiz and gets to meet men from all walks of life, compared them to government bonds. They take so long to mature. Cindy compared them to bank accounts. Without a lot of money, they don't generate much interest. And Una likened them to pillows. Eventually, even the best ones get soft and lumpy. While Linda compared them to coffee. The best ones are rich, hot, and can keep you up all night. Go, Linda. Just kidding. All of the ladies had nothing but kind, thoughtful, and considerate things to say about the lads in their lives. I compared them to Burns. Burns knew how to communicate. As a wordsmith, he was cock of the walk. Not like most of our lads today who hyperventilate when we say, "Can we talk?" Today, not like back in the days of Burns, you lads really have it made. You can do your nails with a pocket knife. Below your neck, you don't have to shave. Your last name is yours to keep. You can stay out all night in the bars. It's okay when you belch, acceptable for you to snore, and you see absolutely nothing wrong with eating out of jars. But we have to give you credit. You are trying to improve your ways. You put the seat down, some of the time, and take their baseball cap off in cafes. But if you really want to win us over, here's how you can get all our votes. Get off the couch, turn off the hockey, and throw away the remote. Now I'm sure it must seem to you lads at times like we are trying to take over the place. But I can assure you, you need not fret. That simply isn't the case. Not that we couldn't handle it without losing a beat in our pace. But believe it or not, there are some things we can't do alone, like continuing the human race. Ladies, please stand and join me in a toast to our men, to the lads. We love you and wish to show it by raising our glasses. To the lads.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name's Robbie Burns. You know, one of the things that's going on just now with this COVID, it's really bad, I know. But something I've just latched onto is Netflix and binge watching television. I've been watching, just on the weekend there, I was watching this show, well, a bunch of shows actually by a guy, Sylvester
Stallone?
No, I switched it off last night, but yeah, anyway. So tonight we're going to do To a Louse, which was a poem that I wrote after one day being in the kirk and seeing the lady in front of me, and there was a louse on the back of her hat, and it just struck me that it was something worth memorializing. Thank you. It's good stuff, you know. So here we go. To a Louse. Huh. Where are you gone, you crowling fairly? Your impudence protects you sairly, but my, you strunt rarely o'er gauze and lace. Though faith, I fear ye dine but sparely on sic a place. You ugly, creeping, blasted wonner, detested, shunned by saunt and sinner. How dare ye set your foot upon her, sae fine a lady? Gae somewhere else and seek your dinner on some poor body. Swith in some beggar's hoffet squattle, there ye may creep and crawl and sprottle wi' other kindred jumping cattle in shoals and nations, where horn nor bane ne'er dare unsettle your thick plantations. You haud ye there, you're out of sight, below the fatral, snug and tight. Na, faith ye yet, you'll no be right till you've got on it, the very topmost towering height o' Mrs. Bonnet. My sooth, right bold ye set your nose out, as plump and grey as ony groset, o for some rank mercurial roset or fell red smedum, I'd gie ye sic a hearty dosie it would dress your drawdoms. I wouldna be surprised to spy on an old wife's flainin' toy, or abling some bit duddy boy on's wily coat. But Mrs. Fine Lanardi, why, how dare ye do it? Oh, Jenny, dinna toss your heed, and set your beauties o' a breed. Ye little ken what cursed speed the blast is makin'. They winks and finger ends I dread are notice takin'. O would some power the giftie gie us, to see ourselves as other see us. It would frae mony a blunder free us and foolish notion, what airs and grace and gait would leave us, and even devotion. Thank you. Slange. Thank you.
Hello everybody, my name's David Meffin and I'm here to give the toast to the immortal memory of Robert Burns, who was born on January the 25th, 1759, Scotland's bard. Now, who was this man? Why is he so celebrated not only in Scotland but all over the world? There are Burns dinners from Moscow to Manhattan, from Sydney to Singapore, from Valparaiso to Vancouver, and even from Edmonton, Alberta to Edmonton in North London. Now, was he the poor, rustic ploughman? Was he the drunken poet who died from the results of chronic alcoholism? Was he the womanizer who left countless children destitute? Now, these descriptions of Burns seem to be the general understanding of those people who have not taken the trouble to look into Burns and his life. Or maybe they're people who listen to those who take great pleasure in perpetuating these myths. Are some of the criticisms true? Yes, they are. But to what degree? After all, Burns is human with human failings. Yes, Burns was a ploughman, brought up in the tough life of a poor farm, but this rustic ploughman could read and write by the age of 8. He could read and write French when he was 13, and he had reasonable understanding of Latin at 14. And this thanks to his father, William Burns, who had the foresight to make sure that all of his children had a good education. And also he had very good teachers. But all of this is put into place because of the Scottish Education Act of 1696, when all parishes had to have a school and teachers. It was 175 years after this that England followed in Scotland's footsteps with their own Education Act. Now, Burns' life was during the period of European history that was known as the Scottish Enlightenment, when great engineers, artists, writers, philosophers, etc. flocked to Scotland, mainly to the universities of Edinburgh and Glasgow. And Burns eventually found himself in Edinburgh after the publication of his first book of poetry, the Kilmarnock edition. And it was here in Edinburgh that the upper crust and the aristocracy took him into their drawing rooms to display him. And they're the ones that gave him the rustic ploughman poet title. And he would relish this celebrity status. He was not to know that they would eventually shun him due to his dangerous politics. Was he a drunkard? Well, listen to what his brother Gilbert had to say about this when talking about Robert's 7-year in the village of Tarbolton. During this period, he became a Freemason, which was his first introduction to the life as a boon companion. Yet notwithstanding these circumstances and the praise he has bestowed on Scotch drink, I do not recollect during these 7 years, nor till towards the end of his commencing author, to ever have seen him intoxicated, nor was he at all given to drinking. This doesn't mean that he didn't drink, doesn't mean that he was not probably intoxicated at some time. In fact, we know that he probably was. There was an occasion where a performance by a lady actress of his poem The Rights of Woman at Dumfries Theatre. A lady who was present at the time said that when Burns entered the theatre, he was somewhat affected by liquor. Oh, the Rights of Woman was written by Burns as a counter to Thomas Paine's The Rights of Man. Now, this myth of his excessive drinking was put about by his political antagonists. It was to their advantage to portray him as a drunkard. And this was somewhat ironic because his biggest antagonist was Henry Dundas, Secretary of State for the Homeland. Dundas was a Scot. But then his friend was the Prime Minister, William Pitt. And between them, they managed to declare or threaten war to half of the countries in Europe, including Spain, France, and Russia. And they did this after they had been sitting in a hotel room in Dover in for several days drinking in August of 1792. Burns, the womanizer, he certainly had his loves, and as a result there were children. 4 with his wife Jean Armour and 9 more with other women. But to Burns, they were all his children. They were his responsibility, and he did not abandon them, and he continued to support them all to the best of his ability. And this is shown in a poem he wrote to his daughter that he had with a lady called Elizabeth Patten. For thou be what I would hae thee, and tak the counsel I shall gie thee. I'll never rue my trouble wi' thee, the cost nor shame o't, but be a loving father to thee, and brag the name o't. Yes, his philandering with the ladies was one of his failings, but I don't think it was always Robert that did the pursuing. His looks and his magnetic personality, not to mention his fame, must have attracted the ladies to him, and much like the entertainment and sports stars of today, he welcomed their attention. But indeed, Burns was only human, and he asked us, as he does in this poem, the address to the Unca Gid, then gently scan your brother man, still gentler sister woman, though they may gang a ken and rang. To step aside is human. Maybe we can agree then to accept Burns' human failings. Now, without Burns' love of the ladies, or perhaps it was because he was in love with love itself, we wouldn't have had the beautiful love poetry that he wrote. My own favourite is A Red, Red Rose. Oh, my love's like a red, red rose that's newly sprung in June. Oh, my love's like a melody that's sweetly played in tune. Now, he also wrote a number of poems from the woman's point of view. And let's just listen to this wonderful poem he wrote, John Anderson, My Joe. Now, my Joe means my love in Old Scottish. A song of the true lasting love of an old woman to her husband. Now, the song was originally a very bawdy song when Burns first came across it, but then he cleaned it up and he made it this. John Anderson, my Joe, John, when first we were acquaint, your locks were like the raven, your bonny brow was brent, but now your brow is bell, John. Your locks are like the snow, but blessing on your frosty pow, John Anderson, my Joe. John Anderson, my Joe, John, we clambered hill together, and mony a canty day, John, we've had wi' ane another. Now we maun totter down, John, and hand in hand we'll go, and sleep together at the foot, John Anderson, my Joe. What a wonderful understanding he had of lasting true love from a man who only lived to be 37 years old. Now, Burns also hated hypocrisy, and he wrote many songs and poems calling out the hypocrites, especially those of the aristocracy and church officials. One of his best was his Holy Willie's prayer about Willie Fisher, who was an elder in the parish of Mauchline, who, in Burns' words, asked God in his prayer for God to pardon him for the tryst that he'd had last night with Meg. And if God does pardon him, he promises that he will never ever lift a leg against her again. But there's another Burns who is now only coming to light. A Burns different to the one who wrote love poems, sarcastic lines about the clergy, or used wit and humour to describe everyday life. There's the political Burns. The Burns who used his pen to oppose the almost dictatorial government that was ever seen in Britain. A government afraid of the possibility of the French and American revolutions spreading to Britain. Prime Minister William Pitt and his Scots friend Henry Dundas employed spies and informants to root out the dissenters and the radicals. Burns was considered one of these radicals. His support of both the French and the American revolutions is well shown in his poems such as The Tree of Liberty, and he even wrote a poem for George Washington's birthday. He had a fear of imprisonment as a result, and he was correct to fear this or worse. Other Scots, Irish, English, Welsh radicals had been tried for treason and transported to Botany Bay, where no doubt their descendants are still thriving. And he used his pen to express his views, and he did this having to use nom de plumes or maybe just write anonymously. He was a regular contributor to several of the more liberal London, Edinburgh, Glasgow and Belfast newspapers and magazines. London's The Morning Chronicle actually offered him an editorial position. His skills and fame were not just confined to the north of the border, and he wrote in the King's English as well as he did in his native Scots. To give an example of how careful he had to be with what he wrote, his most famous poem, at least my opinion, his most famous poem about equality and brotherhood, A Man's a Man for All That, was published anonymously in the Glasgow magazine, August of 1795. It was labelled as seditious by the government. I will read you the last verse of A Man's a Man for All That. Now remember, this was so-called seditious. Then let us pray that come it may, as come it will for all that sense and worth o'er all the earth shall bear the gree and all that. For all that and all that man to man the world o'er shall brothers be for all that. So there we have it. Burns the man with his failings, Burns the man with his loves, Burns the man who strove to right the wrongs that he saw around him. He wielded his pen to make his mark, and he gave us sayings that we use every day. The best laid schemes o' mice and men gang after gley, from To a Mouse. Oh, would some power the gift to gie ourselves as others see us, from To a Louse. Let us do or die, from Scots Wha Hae. Man's inhumanity to man makes countless thousands to mourn, from a man was made to mourn. But Burns also described many everyday things. Here's something we've probably, most of us have experienced in our life, a toothache. Now have listened to how Burns describes a toothache. Is addressed to the toothache. My curse on your envenomed stang that shoots my tortured gooms alang, or through my lugs gies money a bang with gnawing vengeance, tearing my nerves with bitter twang like racking engines. Oh, you can feel the pain. Now we know that Burns also enjoyed the pleasures of life as well as we do, or maybe even a little bit better than we do. But could we describe those pleasures that we have had and they're all too quickly passing away, as well as he does in this verse from his great story poem, Tam O'Shanter. As Tam realises he's been away too long, and although he's already enjoyed himself, he must rise up and away him to his wife and family. Burns uses the following verse to dampen Tam's spirits. But pleasures are like poppies spread. You seize the flower, its bloom is shed, or like the snow falls in the river, a moment white, then melts forever. So it's been my pleasure to be with you this evening for this very different Burns night, the 202nd anniversary of his birthday. And Burns wrote, "Nae man can tether time nor tide." And that is true. Time I was finished. So please charge your glasses and be upstanding and toast with me to the immortal memory of Robert Burns. Robert Burns.
There is a star whose beaming ray is shed on every clime. It shines by night, it shines by day, and ne'er grows dim with time. It rose upon the banks of air, it shone on Doon's clear stream. 200 years again and more, yet brighter grows its beam. Let kings and courtiers rise and fall, this world has many turns, but brightly beams upon them all. The star Robbie Burns, though he was but a ploughman lad and wore the hood and grey, all Scotia's greatest bards were bred aneath a roof o' stray, to sweep the strings of Scotia's lyre. It needs nae classic lore, it's mother wit and native fire that warms the bosom's core. Let kings and courtiers rise and fall, this world has many turns, but brightly beams upon them all. The star o' Robbie Burns, let kings and courtiers rise and fall, this world has many turns, but brightly beams upon them all. The star o' Robbie Burns.